how I like to think about my rigging, how I rig my boat. But basically it comes down to one word, which is efficiency. I want to be able to do the least amount of work and have the greatest amount of impact, right? So first off, you're going to notice this is Patrick's boat, who I think I've helped rig a couple times. But basically, markings on the vang are really important, right? So markings on the vang will tell you if you're block to block at the start line, if you're at a good vang setting for reach, if you're at a good vang setting for downwind, etc. Right? So markings are extremely important. So if I pull on the outhaul, the main sheet, see how it's slack? The way I find block to block is I pull my main sheet block to block, pull all the slack out, and then I put a marking where that block is, right? So this is a very good sort of all-rounder setting for your vang to have on most breezes. This is typically how you're going to want to start. Pull your vang on at the start in most breezes just to get a nice median setting so you can control your boat, head up, head down, speed up, slow down, etc. So vang markings, really important. Next really important thing is outhaul markings, right? So I like to look for my last outhaul marking to be the deepest part of my sail. So if I'm going very light wind, downwind, I want about, call it 2 hand lengths, maybe a foot of space in between the boom and the outhaul. So Patrick, your outhaul might be a little short here, but we'll see what we can do with it. Yeah, so this is still a little tight for the outhaul. You guys can all see the amount of space in between here. Right, I'm looking for around 2 hand lengths. So if I put my hands here, I should be able to fit 2 hand lengths, right? What that does is that just gives us the deepest amount of sail. If you want to think about a spinnaker, it's really deep. We want a lot of power held in our sail. So my general rule of thumb, especially for booms that have the strap here, right, is that I'll go off my strap and I'll put 6 markings about an inch apart. So here you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So maybe I would go another one, but I would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then depending on what my deepest point, so however deep this is, so for example in my boat, instead of having this looped around like this, I have it snugged right up to the block, right? So that gives me a little bit more depowering zone, right? So the more line that you have, the more space you have in between each block, the more you're able to pull on, right? So if I have this block right up next to that block on the boom, then I have that much more power to depower. And when it gets really, really windy, then you're gonna really want to have that extra inch, right? You don't want to have pull it all the way on and then you need just a little tiny bit more to depower. You want to have a whole big space, right? So same with the vang. Vang, you want the block right up close top right here. So a lot of people will have their vangs down here, right? And you don't want to pull on all your vang and then still need a little bit more vang, right? You want to have as much space and as much line to depower your boat as possible. So for rigging your outhaul, block as tight as possible to the block that clips in the mast. For your outhaul, right, blocks as close to where you're tying them off to. So they should really be snugged up here, right? And then that'll give you that extra little bit to pull on. For Cunningham especially, this is arguably the most important control because this is what depowers your boat the most. You really want as much space to depower as possible, right? So on this boat here, what I'd look for is I'd really want to see the Cunningham block. So Patrick's probably going to want to get a little longer lines. Sorry for tearing apart your boat, but for outhaul rigging, you really want your outhaul every single time to be right up close to the grommet, right? Because that gives you that extra inch to pull down, and when it's nuking windy, like survival conditions, and you have to put both feet on and really crank down on the Cunningham, if you crank down on the Cunningham as much as you can and it's still not enough, then you're in trouble, right? Because all those guys who can depower their boat just an extra inch more than you, stay a little bit flatter, they're gonna be a lot more in control, sailing a lot faster, right? So really make sure that your out haul is right snug up. So one way that I like to do this is to have everything preset, right? So if you notice here, this is how I rig my Cunningham, right? So first off, if you're sailing a full rig, it's really important to have 2 blocks as a depowering thing, right? So this is kind of set up more for a radial, right? But he's sailing full rig for the first time, I think, today, right? So really you want a double block up here. So the way I do it is I take 2 blocks like this, tie them off, and then I can show you how to rig that. Or you can just get, like Sean has over here, just this double block. Everyone see that double block there? Right? So he's just got a double block up there, right? So you really want to look for a double block, so you have, I think, 6-to-1 depowering, right? 4-to-1 depowering as opposed to 3-to-1, right? Any extra power that you have to really crank the top of the sail down, pull your draft down, etc. Get that leverage like we talked about a couple weeks ago. So we talked about last weekend how you're hiking against the lever. So if this is your boat and you have your sail, if you have someone pushing at the top of your mast, it's going to be a lot more powerful than someone pushing right at the bottom of your mast, right? So if you ever use a big crowbar, right, that analogy, big crowbar is much easier than a smaller crowbar. So in pulling the Cunningham down, you really want as much power so you don't pull your draft from the top to like maybe the middle. You want to get it all the way down to the bottom if the conditions call for it. And if you can't, then you're going to have a really rough time hiking against that, and you're going to be a lot more tired than you necessarily should have. So how I rig my Cunningham, which is in my opinion the most important and most fluid control, meaning that you're going to change it as much as possible all the time racing, right? So you get a big puff, pull more Cunningham on. You get it going to a lull, take your Cunningham off, right? So for example, when I'm racing, I'm pulling on my Cunningham, I probably change it at least 20 times upwind, just on, off, on, off, on, off, depending on the length of the race, depending on conditions, depending on whatever wave states, right? If it's a really big pointy waves where my bow slows down and my bow crashes into the wave, my boat slows down, right? Then I'm probably going to take a little bit of Cunningham off, get the boat draft lifted up a little bit, get the boat a little bit more powered up, and then once I get that speed going, so now we just go around and make sure everyone's boats are into the wind or but basically, right, you just want to have as much power to pull down the Cunningham as possible. So the way I do it is I like to have one set line that I know that when I push it through, pull through the grommet, every time it's going to be right at the top of the sail, right? So for you guys who can't see on the side, right, when I pull it through, it's always like right up top there. And then the next way that I do it is I have a leash going around the bottom of the mast, right? So kind of like Patrick has here, where he has this leash that comes through. So, for example, I have mine set to my leash. I put my leash around, push, have this loop here, preset, put my leash around, go around the vang, through the vang, and then I'm set. And notice how my Cunningham block is up as tight as possible to the grommet, right? So that means when it's fully rigged, I have all that space to pull it down. And in some cases, you're trying to pull that grommet below the boom, right? On a radial, that's what you can do. In a full rig, it's a little bit harder, steel glass a little bit stiffer. You got all these reinforced sleeves, etc. But if it's super nuking, right, then you would rig your Cunningham to one side as opposed to both sides of the boom. So for example, instead of pushing it like we have set up here, where you have one string going on one side of the boom and one string going the other, you would pull it all on one side of the boom so you can really try to get that grommet past the boom, right? If you have it rigged on both sides, then you can only pull it to the boom and not past it. The next big rigging thing that I do is tying off my main sheet, right? So how many people tie off their main sheets? Right? Good number, right? So what tying off our main sheets does is it makes our life a lot easier. Anyone ever round the windward mark and their main sheet's just in like a big bird's nest and you can't get around the mark because you can't steer down, and then all of a sudden you capsize, then you have people going by you and it's just a big mess after you're leading the race, right? I know I have. Never have. So the best way to avoid that is to tie off your main sheet on one end. Yes, it'll probably still get cut up a couple times, but the way that you avoid that is to constantly keep checking it. And if you tie off one end, the worst knot you can get is just one big slip knot, right? So once you untangle it all, you get a nice slip knot. If you have one end that's free, you might end up getting a really big knot where you have to really spend a lot of time to figure out kind of what's going on, how to pull this through there, right? And just get the knot undone. But when you tie it off to one end, then it's just theoretically one big slip knot. So the best way that I like to tie it off, if everyone can come a little closer and see in here, is I like to do exactly this, is I put it through this bolt or grommet or fair lead. Yeah, put it through this fair lead here that's connected to the hiking strap, and just have one knot. You don't need a big barrel knot like this. So I'm trying to use as much space as possible on my lines, right? So for example, I want every single inch of space that I get. So if I'm rigging my boat, then I'll put the smallest little just stopper knot, big old granny knot right here. I put it down a little bit just so I have that extra inch to let my sail out, right? So when that's tied off there, when I'm sailing, what I'll do is I'll pull it all the way through. If it's just stayed like that, I keep it in my boat like this. I don't re-rig my main sheet all the time, but oftentimes your main sheet will twist a lot, right? Because you're turning the block is twisting, your sail is twisting, your main sheet's twisting, right? So I'll pull it all the way through this fair lead once, make sure it's really nice and straight. So I'll walk back behind my boat, kind of make sure there's no twists or snags or anything in it, and then I carefully coil it back up, and then carefully just kind of pull it back through to the end. And what this does, again, is it just makes sure that I don't have as many wrinkles, as many twists, as many bird's nest right when I start. A couple of times I'll do this on the water too, right? So when I'm sailing on the water, if I notice that, for example, my main sheet seems really twisty, a lot more so than it did earlier today, for example. Then I'll go through, I'll pull it all the way through one way, just untwist it again, make sure it's all nice and cleanly running, because you don't want to be at the start, for example, and have to let your sail out a lot to protect your hull, and then find that there's a big knot, not let your sail out, your boat starts moving, and then you're over early, right? So it's all about having efficiency. Next thing, especially if you're practicing for regattas, I wouldn't recommend this, but just for practice's sake, I told practice to try it out today, and that's tying a slip knot at the end of your main sheet, right? So the theory behind this is that when you're sailing upwind, you theoretically are really only using about a foot of your main sheet, right? So if you're block to block and you're sailing upwind and you let your sail out, pull it in, let your sail out, that's probably as much as you're gonna let it out on the upwind, right? So that's probably this to there, so I don't know, give it 2 feet, right? So if I pull my main sheet in, I'm only really using 2 feet of that line, right? So only that 2 feet is gonna get really worn out, and over time it'll fray, the casing will break, and then your main sheet breaks, right? So you can change the size of that knot, and that'll change like the most area where it's rubbing on the main sheet block, so that you save time and you give your main sheet a little bit more length. And then once it starts to get really like sketchy in that area, then you just switch the end. So you put that end at the inside of the cockpit, and then you put the inside of the cockpit at the other end. Next thing that's really important that I like is this out-haul leash, right? So you see Patrick got it here. And the reason that I do not recommend putting it on the gooseneck, there's a nice little hole here that you can see where a lot of people tie on the gooseneck. No, I don't put it on the gooseneck for the reason that when you're going downwind, your boom is going to kind of lift up and twist out, and you get a nice little space in between the boom and the gooseneck, right? And if you have your Cunningham, for example, here, a lot of times if you are going upwind and it's really heavy and your boom is bending in different ways, your mast is bending in different ways, this space opens up a lot. And if you try to let your Cunningham off and the Cunningham gets stuck in this boom space, it's really hard to kind of go in and get that. So that still happens with the leash, but by pushing this, for example, mine's down and out, right? So my line kind of comes through here, and then I'll put my Cunningham with this leash forward so that it kind of angles a little bit more forward, right? So instead of tying it onto this vang here where your Cunningham is, I'll loop it around my leash here so it's all pulled a little bit forward and it's at an angle and a lot harder to catch, right? So again, all these things for my rigging is just to mitigate any big disasters so that I don't have to deal with like the small little problems, and I can just go around the race course as efficiently as possible. This is a really great tool, is a bungee over your vang. You can use this, you can use E-tape instead of a bungee. But the theory behind this is that when you go over a big wave and you're really pulling in your main sheet really quickly around that leeward mark, sometimes you forget to put on the vang, right? And if you hit a big wave, your main sheets and your vang is loose, then this will sometimes pop out. And trying to put that back in at 25 knots with 30 boats behind you is not really the funnest of times, right? So really just, this is a really easy thing you can do. Just throw a piece of E-tape around it, put a bungee on it, just do whatever you can to keep that in place so that it doesn't fall out. The next big thing that I like to think about is my daggerboard bungee, right? So a lot of people have their daggerboard bungee attached to the bow there. That's fine, but again, the reason I don't do it is I like to have sort of nothing in my way when I'm trying to adjust things. So when you go downwind and you have the bungee attached to the bow, then a lot of times what you'll find is when your vang goes to one side or another, then it's going to interfere with your vang. It's going to kind of go right through the middle of your vang. It's going to push up on your vang. It might even tighten your vang if it's really, really light out, right? Putting just that little bit of extra tension on your leech that you don't want to have, right? So what I do is I put my bungee right in the middle. I put a little piece of line in between these two blocks here and tie my bungee off there, and then get the nice right amount of tension. So the right amount of tension for a daggerboard bungee is to have it just so that you can clip it so it's just barely reaching this cam cleat here, and then if you pull it you can kind of just keep it there, right? So you just want a little bit of tension to pull it there, and what that does is it just keeps the daggerboard down enough. If you put too much on, if it's too tight, right, if you have too much tension on your bungee, then it's going to pull your daggerboard up. If you have too loose of a tension, your daggerboard's just going to pop up, right? So we want to keep our daggerboard down, especially in high current situations like we're probably going to have today, right? Has anyone seen the moon lately, or anyone seen the tides lately, right? We're in that spring tide season, so we have super low and super high tides, which means that we're going to have really strong current. So when we have really strong current, you really want to think about having your daggerboard as down as possible. And again, I don't want anything interfering with my daggerboard, so I make sure my daggerboard bungee is perfect so I'm not in the middle of a start and then have to bang my daggerboard down. Then I look up and someone who had their daggerboard down all along creeps up and is now right on top of me. So the next thing that I really highly recommend is this addition to your vang. So this is all one piece of your vang. I think laser class rules define it as you can't have another piece of rope attached to your vang. So this all has to be one line of your vang, and I make it long enough so I think the right measurement is something like 63 inches or something from the handle of where your vang is to the dagger board. So don't quote me on that, but I'd say just get a much longer line of your dagger board, maybe an extra 4 or 5 feet, and then cut off what's excess. And what this does is you tie it to this loop on your dagger board here, right? So I just tie a little little bowline around it. That way, when I'm sailing and it's really wavy and my vang inevitably just goes down there, I don't need to reach forward and all awkwardly go in and grab it. And let's say, for example, like today, we're gonna have these big puffs that are gonna come down. You reach in, go to grab your vang, you get a big puff, and then you flip, right? So all I wanna do is just reach to the middle of the boat, get that line, and then pull it up. And then what I'll even do is I'll tie another couple of knots in here. So I'll tie like a couple of bowlines or stopper knots in here, just so that I have another handle. So for example, at the start, right, I don't want to lean all the way in to grab my vang if I have to. If I'm in like a really critical situation, that extra lean in is going to heel my boat over that little bit, and then I slide into somebody, someone else gets a better hole on top of me, and then they get to roll it right over the top of me. So what I like to do is I just have these little knots here where I reach in, grab it, just so I can pull it a little bit more, then I reach it, grab it again, and then crank it on to where my starting position is. Another great thing, which I highly recommend, is no quick pins here. There's a pack's got a quick pin. Again, it's just, the theory of my rigging is to just mitigate all the biggest disasters that you can possibly have, right? So a quick pin, that could fall out in the middle of the race. It's not super secure, right? And then if that falls out in the middle of the race, I sail with so many of these things that just pop out, they sink, and then you don't have a vang. You have to go in, you're done for the racing for the day, right? Or if you're out for a practice, and you know your vang stops, and you have to go in for practice. So just get rid of these like easy things where they can pop out. Alright, and then last couple of things here is an adjustable hiking strap, right? So an adjustable hiking strap is really important if you are a shorter guy like me. If you happen to be above 6 feet, don't think too forward here, then you need an adjustable hiking strap, because an adjustable hiking strap lets you get that much farther outside the boat. Right, so for example, if we're just sailing and it's super tight, and our feet can only go this far out of the boat, that means we're only going to be able to get our head like that much farther out of the boat. If our hiking strap is really loose and we can really pull it all the way like over here when we're hiking, when we get that extra little inch, and I think the flattening force or something is, like if you're an average 6-foot male, then you get like 8 pounds of flattening force per inch. Right, so if you can get 2 more inches out, you get 16 more pounds flattening the boat. 3 inches out, 24 more pounds, right? So every inch counts. Every inch you can just get your head out a little bit farther is going to give you that extra bit of flattening force. So that's why a lot of tall laser sailors happen to do much better in heavier breeze, because they can keep their hiking strap really tight. They don't have to hike as hard or as far out, right? Because they already have that naturally tall flattening force. The next thing and the last thing, or last couple of things, is your rudder, right? So Stu and I have a lot of arguments over this, which is that I like to have my rudder cranked down. So I will literally, when I rig it, step on it and pull the tiller into it as tight as I possibly can, just so that it doesn't move. So if you get any movement, and the perfect rudder is to get this leading edge of the rudder parallel with this bracket, right? And if it's up any bit more, then you're getting that little extra tiny bit of space and steering that's going to slow you down. So if you have a really wavy day, for example, every steering is going to be like an nth of a bit slower than the guy who has his rudder perfect, right? So these are just a couple little silly things that really make a big difference when you add it all up, right? So if the guy who has his perfect and then you have yours an inch, let's say you lose like a tenth of a boat length, right? You do 100 steering movements, then you lose 10 boat lengths, and the guy you loses 0, right? So keep your rudder tight. That's my theory. Or if you're racing, if you like to put it up, just really make sure you crank it down on the water, and so it can't pop it up at all. The next and most important thing. Patrick, do you want to come sit on your boat just so it doesn't so the next and most important thing is your traveler, right? So this is a really important tool because if it's really loose, then your sail trim and everything is going to be off because you're going to be like, I don't know, an extra couple of inches up and you're not going to really be truly block to block. So the way that I like to do this is, in some cases I'll even splice through where I need to do it, and I can show you that later, but really it's just trying to think about making this triangle here as tight as possible. The tighter this triangle is, the more tension there is going to be on this longer edge of the triangle, and it's going to be a lot tighter, and it's going to not let it lift up as much, right? So really making this as tight as possible. When I'm rigging mine, for example, it'll look just like one tight string, and the only way to get the triangle is when I pull it a little bit that way, and it's as tight as a triangle as I can possibly get, right? This has some pluses and benefits and cons. The cons are that if it's super light wind, you got to take it off just a little bit so that your main sheet can actually get across your tiller, right? But if it's anything over 5 or 8 knots, then you can really just crank that thing down and have really perfect sail trim. The last final thing here is this thing, bailer bungs, right? So bailer bungs are extremely important for anything under 8 knots or anything under 5 knots. Anything above 8 knots or anything above 10 knots, I literally just pull it right off and put it in my life jacket. Or what you can do is you can stick it underneath the tow rail in there, and that usually stays. But I wouldn't recommend it because sometimes they can fall out, so I just stick it right in my life jacket. And the reason for that is you're going fast enough in a laser, and anything above 8 knots where the water is just going to drain out and you're not going to have any water in there, right? So if you have anything impeding that water drainage, aka your bailer bung, then it's just going to make your boat be that much more full of water. Any questions on that?
When you're, do you usually keep the drain closed?
Anything over 8 knots, I keep it open.
Okay.
Yep, so always open.
Okay.
And then okay, now last couple of things I want to talk about, which is just a real quick chalk talk before we hit the water, is racing energy, right? So unless you are the fittest man in the world, then you most likely cannot hike the boat 100% of the race, right? Unless we have really short courses, it's tough, right? Even for the top guys, it's tough for them to race at 100% capacity all the time. So there's a few key areas where you really want to think about putting in 100% effort and then maybe kind of relaxing a little bit more. Can anybody think of what those key areas are? Start, that's one.
Top mark.
Top mark.
Puffs.
Puffs.
Finish.
Finish.
Leeward mark. Rounding.
Leeward mark rounding. Yep. Any others? What about
trying to hold your lane?
Yeah, lane. So we'll call that anybody above you. So anyone above you.
Maybe after completing a tack, or
Maybe.
Okay, not necessarily. Okay.
I'm gonna put that aside for now.
Okay.
But how about a cross, right? If you're trying to cross somebody, crosses. How about a ley line, right? Ley lines are really important. If you're ducking somebody, right? So crosses, we'll just say / ducking. And then I'm gonna put a little asterisk next to the start, and I'm gonna say what I like to call the 100-meter race, or the 100-foot race, right? So 100 feet.
So that leaves in between races. Based on your list, that leaves in between races you can relax.
Exactly. So, yes. So we all see, so start, top, marks, puffs, finish, leeward mark rounding, 100 foot off the start, ley lines, crosses, and anyone above you, right? So when you get to short course racing like this, that typically means that you're gonna have to hike a lot of the time, right? But a lot of times when you get to longer course races, if you do your job like you hike at the start and you hike when anyone comes across you, you can take a little bit of relaxation, a little bit more during the race. So for example, let's say it's somewhat of a longer beat upwind, like maybe it's 15 minutes upwind, which is sort of standard for any official laser regattas. 15 minutes upwind. If you just really work hard off the start, then you kind of get into this front pack of group of boats, and then all you have to do is just do the bare minimum to stay in that front group of boats, and then hike when you get like a puff, hike when you get a cross, hike when there's another fleet that's tacking, right? So for example, and sometimes you can relax and build up your energy again are when people start to tack away from you, right? So if you're kind of out on your own and you're hiking in this one big line that's kind of going this way, right? And then you have a bunch of people tack away, you can relax a little bit. So the way that I was taught this is that you want to think about races like this, where you have your start, let's just say mark 1, mark 2, so windward mark, leeward mark, and then you're finished, for example. Just keep it simple. Here's your energy, like a lot of energy up top, not so much energy down bottom, right? You always want to start the first 100 meters as much as possible. Then you can kind of dive down until you get to the top mark. Maybe you're at the top mark to that half energy point. With those occasional spikes, crosses, ducks, right? The moments where you need to be fast as possible. So if someone's trying to cross you, duck you, etc. Downwind, you get to relax a little bit, right? It's a lot easier sailing downwind than it is upwind. It's a little bit more fun. You get a chance to breathe. So in terms of energy level, you're really thinking about being way down low, trying to get as much energy as possible, right? So for anyone who sails with like a heart rate monitor, so I have a heart rate thing on my watch. A lot of sailors sail with a heart rate monitor attached to themselves, is they know their heart rate zones where they want to be like in a recovery heart rate downwind a little bit more. So for example, right after rounding the top mark, they're gonna still go full on, carve out like a nice lane where they can just kind of sail downwind, get some nice speed going in one direction, and then once they get more towards the middle of that downwind, they'll take a little bit of a breather, try to get their heart rate down through breathing really calmly. Just only through breathing really is just 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out, just trying to slow down your breathing a lot, get your heart rate a little bit lower, and then once you get into that recovery phase, wait till you get to so break it into thirds. So if this is right at the top mark, middle, and then bottom mark, right? At the top and the bottom, you're still at full energy, but in the middle, that's where you get your little bit of that rest so that you can come back around for the bottom mark. And then at the finish, you sort of just rocket back up to full hiking to pass as many boats as you need to, unless you happen to be like in a winning position, or if you're in a top 3, right, and you're not going to catch anyone. Just kind of stay in that consistency of boats, right? So what wins races is consistency, not all bullets are a first and a last, a first and a last. It's a second, third, first, second, third, fourth, second, third, right? All staying above top 5, all staying above top 3, right? So you don't need to overexert yourself if you want to play the long game and win a regatta. You don't need to really push yourself every single race, because it might turn into you get first, and then they do 10 more races and you're completely dead, and then you go last, right? So try to figure out how many races are for the day. So for example, a lot of NORs or sailing instructions will say you're gonna have 3 races today. So that means you know that you can split up your races into 3 levels of energy, where the first one is like as hard as you possibly can, the second one is maybe a little bit less, still trying to do it as best you can, and then the third one is just put it all out there for the last race of the day, right? So anyone have any questions on energy and races? Okay, great. So last thing I want to talk about real quickly is just tactics. So again, for those of you who are new to these talks, the way that I teach it is up through the sailing pyramid, where I start in speed, then I go to boat handling, and then I split it into tactics and strategy. So last weekend we focused a little bit more on strategy, which is sailing the race course as if there's no boats and just for the wind. So the wind's a lot stronger on the right, I'm gonna go to the right side and then sail up the course that way. But tactics is a little bit different. Tactics is how you kind of keep your ducks in a row behind you if you're winning, or the best way to pass boats as if you're only sailing against other boats. So let's say that the course is even all the way out throughout, right? There's no specific advantage for wind, and it's just purely how you sail against the other boats. So there's a couple old sayings that you can think of, and the first one is, don't let them cross when you can. So cross a boat when you can, but don't let them cross you. So that means that, for example, think of if Chris Morin's not here, but last 2 weekends ago, right, he was in front of me and he said, right after he crossed me, what should I have done there? And I told him, well, you probably should have tacked, right? So the reason that you do that is because you don't want to give up your opportunity to pass somebody, right? So let's say there's a boat coming sort of just one way, and you're trying to figure out whether or not you can cross or beat them, right? So strategy would say, if you were sailing with strategy would be, okay, I'm gonna duck them, or I'm gonna cross them because I like the left side of the course more. Or I'm gonna tack and lead them throughout because I like the right side of the course more, right? But if you're playing tactics, then if you cross them, then you're basically already giving up any chance that you could have had to beat them, right? So strategy aside, only thinking about tactics, you want to be tacking below them if you can't cross them, or if you can cross them, you want to be tacking on top of them, right? So if you can't cross, you either want to be in a lee bow position as tight as you possibly can. That way you can still be on the same tack going with them, maybe force them to tack, sort of just lead them away, but you're still bow forward. You're still winning that race, right? If you can't cross them and you can't get to a close lee bow, then you really want to think about tacking and leading them out beforehand, right? And then it comes down to a speed game, whoever's faster. If you know that you're a little bit faster, maybe the other guy's a little bit faster, it's just a matter of trying to hang into that front line as much as possible, because now you're sticking with the top group, right? So let's say that there's a big pack of groups, big pack of boats going this way, right? And you're down here. If you tack and stay in this position the whole way through, right, then at least you're not going to lose any distance, right? So I'm really thinking about when I'm racing is how am I not going to lose any distance, and then the little small opportunities I see to gain distance is what I'm going to take, right? So if I'm at the top mark, for example, and someone has a bad rounding, that's a really good time to take some distance. If I'm at the leeward mark and someone has a bad rounding, that's a great time to take a distance. If I see someone has a bad tack above me or on top of me or wherever they are, then I know that that's a great time to just keep sailing straight and going fast and then tacking when I can, right? So if it's really wavy and people are doing a lot of tacks and slowing down, then I'm gonna tack and go and wait for a really smooth spot in the water, tack so I'm not going through all these bumpy waves, and just kind of sail as fast as possible, right? So tactically, if you tack down here, you're at least not losing, right? But let's say that you duck, you decide to duck. If you decide to duck, you come way up here. These guys are still going farther out, right? And you might end up tacking back here, right? Now this might work out if you get a really big left shift, that might be a plus sign, right? Because then you get lifted up and whatever, right? But if you get a header, then you're really screwed, right? Because now all these guys are pointing down and they tack, and then you're the last side of that shift. You've already sailed an extra boat length behind them, right? So you've already given up that chance to cross them. You've sailed an extra boat length behind them, and now if you get a big right shift, for example, they all tack. Instead of you being on that same tack where you didn't lose any boat lengths, right? And you tack and you're right in the same position, now you've just lost 2 boat lengths when they all tack over and are on a lifted tack, right? Does that make sense to everybody? Right, so it's all about taking your gains when is best, right? So tacking down here and sailing in this one position. Let's say you get a big left shift, then you're not going to be super far off. You might lose half a boat length and lose a boat length, right? You might lose 2 boat lengths as opposed to losing 5, right? Depending on how far you tack away. And then last final thing, which is mostly tactical and a little bit strategical, is how wind shifts react and change depending on how much boat lengths you have. So if, let's say you have a starting line, for example. For every 5 degrees of shifts that you get, there's a correlating number to how many boat lengths that'll change depending on how far away you are from somebody. And just to keep it easy street's sake, we're just going to do it as if you're on a starting line, right? So let's say your starting line is 100 boat lengths long, just for easy math, right? If you get a 5-degree shift, then you have a 2.5% distance gained or lost, right? So for example, if you're at the start line here and the race committee sets the line 5 degrees favored to the pin, and you start at the fin, and then this guy starts down here, then this guy is gonna, I think it's actually 12, not 2.5, so it's 12.5% gain for every 5-degree shift, right? So 10-degree shift is 24% gain. 20-degree shift is gonna be 36% gain, right? So 12%. If you start up here at the pin with a 5-degree shift, this guy starts up here, you're already going to be 12.5 boat lengths in front of him, right? If you start and you get a 10-degree shift, right? You get 5-degree lift and a 10-degree shift. If you start at the pin and someone starts down at the boat, then now you're going to be 25 boat lengths behind the person, right? So it really is just, again, this is more strategical, but it's really just being on that favored end of the course and favored end of the line, right? So the closer you are to somebody, the less of an effect that you're gonna have for distance gained or lost. So if you're sailing on this side of the course from somebody and another person is sailing on this side of the course, right? Then depending on the shift, let's say it's really even throughout the course. If you get a 5-degree shift and he gets a 5-degree header, depending on how many boat lengths are between you at that time, let's just call it 100, right? Then you just gained or lost 25 boat lengths, right? So tactically, it's really smart to sail with other boats, right? If you see a big pack going over here, don't be the guy who's like way over here trying to zero and hero it, right? This comes a little bit more strategically, but it's tactical thinking, right? Because now you've just increased that distance to 50 boat lengths, right? And now whatever the degree shift you have, you're gonna gain or lose a lot more. So if you gain, it's great. But if you lose a lot, right? So we wanna mitigate that risk, take the risk as low as possible, and lose as little distance as possible. So instead of sailing on your own, at least stay closer to the pack, right? Or closer to the boats that you're trying to control. Don't let one person go way over to one way. Don't let one person go way over the other way. So that if you do get a shift, right, it's a little bit more of like paranoid sailing. We'd all love to just be, you know, hoping it works out on the right and thinking it's gonna work out on the left. But if you want to play it like really no risk at all, then you want to be as close to the boat as possible so that when you get a 5-degree shift, you only lose like a half a boat length as opposed to 25 boat lengths. Does that make sense to everybody? Any questions?
Yeah, one question on when you come into leeward mark and you're, let's say, towards the front of a line of starboard tackers. So you round the mark. I would assume everything below that line is bad air. So do you go to the right to clear them, and then if you want to work your way to the left side of the downwind port?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And Stephen asked if you have a bunch of starboard tackers, right, the whole round of the mark, which is what you get very often when you're in really big fleets. And let's say you didn't have the best rounding, right, and you're down here. Do you stay in that down bad air position, or do you tack? Is that what you're asking pretty much?
Well, you drive to clear that air on the downwind mark. So they're coming up on starboard to the windward mark.
Yep.
And you've rounded the windward mark before them. You know, and you're heading
yes,
downwind.
okay, so you're at the windward mark, not leeward mark. Okay, sorry. Okay, so yeah, that's a great question. So, a bunch of starboard tackers like this, and you just rounded, and then, okay. Yeah, so theoretically, there's a lot of bad air, like in this zone. So, my thinking whenever I am in a position like this is that I want to stay sort of in that middle line until I get out of that bad air zone. Unless there's something really like tasty, like a nice big puff, something really like empowering that I really need that's up here, right? So in some cases, if I'm going downwind and there's a really, really strong puff that you can really clearly see, then yes, I'll round, jibe the mark, get in that puff even though it's bad air, but just take that puff as long as I possibly can. If there's nothing there, then I will always stay, if I draw a rum line, right? So rum line is from the middle of the start line to the windward mark, right? I stay on the right side or the upwind left side, downwind right side, so this side of the downwind course until I get to a point where I can come down and there's no bad air, right? So if there's a big train of starboard tackers here and I jibe, then I'm just gonna be sailing in all that bad air as opposed to sailing, if, say I wanna go to the upwind right or downwind left, right? I'd stay along this line until I got to the point where I'm out of their bad air zone, which is around 11 mast heights is what it really works out to be in no bad air. So 11 mast heights, which is going to be like down here, and then I'll work to the right. Right? I'm not going to shoot in and get into that bed. Any other questions?
Can I just add something to your colossal
Yes.
conversation? Okay, something that we see more on the order of what not to do. Okay. So you've got those boats coming here. And you're coming up this way, right? You don't want to duck and then tack right here. And we see it happen too often. You've just given him the lee bow position. You tack into a really bad spot. If you really want to go right here. Go right before you get there. Don't duck them and then give them the lead out.
Yeah.
That's just bad. And when you had them all stacked up, right? So now we got 4 boats here. Okay. Well, you may cross the first two, but you may not be able to cross the second two. So then you're going to duck them, which actually winds up just giving up the first two that you crossed. You give them back the lead again, and you find yourself out here and you're sort of stranded like you were talking about.
Yeah.
You're kind of doing things all on your own. So keep thinking way ahead and make those good strategic decisions because this side of the course is favored. Make that decision earlier so that you don't find yourself having to make tough tactical decisions.
And then one other quick thing I just wanted to add, which brings me to a great point. This is a really important move that you can think about when you're in a leave-out position, okay? So we've all been in that leave-out position where we're fighting against trying not to fall into that guy's bad air. We're really struggling, so we end up pinching, and then at some point we say, I can't hold it anymore, and I tack out, right? So what we want to do in that situation is this, right?